We are live. This is Literary Roadhouse. One short story once a week. I'm Anais.
I'm Rami.
And I'm Gerald.
And this week we're discussing A Rich Man by Edward P. Jones. Spoilers ahead. If you don't want to be spoiled, there's a link in the show notes to the story. Read it and come back. A Rich Man tells the story of Horace and Lanise Perkins, an elderly couple who live in a retirement community where their neighbors refer to them as the man and wife in apartment 230 who can't stand each other. During their working years, they were both public servants, a history Horace in particular is proud of. Horace, a longtime philandering husband, calls his wife a whore after her one transgression with another lover. Clearly a sticking point for me. He survives his wife, who dies alone in a hospital. After her death, he beds much younger women, including 25-year-old Elaine and 28-year-old Katrina. The women invite other young men of ill repute to crash at the apartment in violation of the community's rules. They pawn his precious records, steal his money, and deal drugs from the apartment. Eventually, the cops raid the apartment and arrest Horace. In jail, he is threatened by cellmates and is cowed. When he returns home, he finds the apartment in disarray, his records shattered, and his prized photo of himself, his wife, and the Secretary of Defense cracked. Elaine returns to the apartment, and Horace chokes her with the intent to kill her. Only the sound of her infant son's cries stop him. All right.
What a weird story this was.
Really? Okay, let's start with you, Gerald. Oh, what was your impression overall?
Sorry.
In addition to weird.
Yes. I find it hard. I found it hard to get into. I read it once and I thought I don't like the story. And after you made the comment in Slack, I read it again and yeah, not that keen.
Okay. Rami?
I thought it was a good story, but it had an abrupt ending.
Really? Okay. So I think I probably liked it more than you guys. I liked it quite a bit. There were some parts that I was just like, what? It was one of those why does everyone suck stories again?
Yes.
I always sometimes struggle with those because just like when you don't have anyone really, I guess the closest you have to root for is maybe Elaine, who after doing some research, I realized is a recurring character from his other stories. So in an earlier story called A New Man, I believe, it's when she runs away and it's her family story. And then there's that missing decade and then it picks up again here with her surfacing here, which is interesting. Yeah. So let's just sort of jump right in. Let's start. What do you guys think the story is about?
I think that's one of the biggest things I had a problem with because it just seemed to be quite a sad little story of a philandering husband, a misogynist, who sort of gets his just desserts, but I just think it's I don't know. There's no redemption. There's no. He hasn't learnt anything. I don't think. I just. So I don't know. In short.
Rami, for you, what's the story about?
Perhaps the desire to remain young could be one of the themes. I mean, I don't know. You could kind of pick and choose things, but what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that he doesn't learn a lesson by the end, really, he comes close at various points to coming a lesson. I kind of jotted them down every time. I'm like, he's about to have that moment and then he doesn't. And I think it's just a little bit about how ingrained this sort of entitlement that men have is just, there's a reason why you, as a writer, I would think you have Lanise have one lover throughout their entire very long marriage. Because if she's too much of a saint, you don't get that moment where you see how there's that double standard where he has an entitlement where his philandering is okay, expected, fine. Her one transgression, in a way that's like after you learn about all of his philandering and the fact he's not even really hiding it that much from her, you're like, it's allowed. Like, right? Like you give her a pass. You're like, oh, yeah, here's a guy who's basically has a lot of open disdain for you, disrespects you all the time, and someone else comes along and like gives you any sort of attention and loves you, you're gonna be tempted, right? So there's just this way in which it's about his entitlement to women's bodies, his entitlement to sex. And the fact that he doesn't learn a lesson, I think, is how just like deeply ingrained that is.
Yeah.
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 He comes close a few times though.
Excuse me. Yeah, and she, I mean, she has a second affair with the guy at Baptist Church
Uh-huh.
after they essentially started living separate lives.
Yeah. They're already sleeping in separate beds and
yeah, so it's sort of understandable. But yeah, it's entitlement, yeah, and the whole sort of misogynistic aspect to it, and it seemed as though it was set more in the era of the Cheever second story, that in the 50s, because it had that sort of vibe for me. It had that sort of mid-century vibe, and I was quite surprised when the author sort of dropped in the 1970s, 1980s, and I thought it's I don't know, it's got a funny sort of like displaced from that time.
Mm-hmm.
Felt like.
I agree that it does feel a little displaced from that time. But because they're a lot older, sometimes I think I just chalked it up to their culture because they're so much older. Like it's a bit like I guess I just saw that displacement as the way that they live their lives.
Yeah.
But I just want to touch on the moments where I thought he was about to get it and then he didn't. The first was in jail when one of the guys threatens sexual assault on him. And he has a moment where he's like, that's the same threats that he would use against women, and now it's being used against him. I thought he was about to have a moment there, right? Like, yeah, this is the way you've been threatening women for a long time, and now someone's doing it to you, and how does that feel, kind of thing? But it didn't happen, right? The other time was when he gets home and he's repeating over and over, my name is Horace Perkins, my name is Horace Perkins, and he keeps sort of like, after this happens to him, he's still clinging to his masculinity, to his name, right? The fact that this shouldn't be happening to him. He is Horace Perkins. How can this happen to him? Which is interesting because we'll get to that in a minute. This story I found interesting because it's a Black couple, and I think almost all the characters here are Black. A lot of them are from the Black neighborhoods of DC. So I'm like, give me a sec. But like, just the male entitlement, the misogyny, that part, sure, fine. But the part where he seems to even, when it came to like the jail, the cops and everything else, he thought he still had some standing ground. I thought was odd. Again, like that's normally not a thing that you would, a form of entitlement that you typically associate with Black men. Quite the opposite. They feel especially vulnerable there in a way that he didn't when it came to law enforcement. I thought was odd. With women's bodies, yeah, okay. But with everything else, I was like, it felt strange. Yeah, I thought he also came close when he thought about the only positive thought he ever had of Lenise is the way that she would perfectly iron his handkerchiefs. I thought he was about to come close to some sort of regret. Nope. And then I thought the ending was perfect because of the titles that the author chose out. Kind of tells a little bit the story of his life. It's like a.
How do you explain syncopated walk? I didn't get that. I was anticipating, okay, there's gonna be some symbolic meaning to these.
Right, like that short, stunted, kind of like stuttering walk. Like he's some sort of affliction is the way I see it. He's got a limp to him now, having gone through this experience. Because in a way, he's brought down by women, right? Because Elaine and Katrina are completely playing him as he thinks he's playing them. Yeah. They're playing him, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. Did any of this inspire any did it move the needle for you guys, or are you still resisting?
I'm still resisting. I think it's interesting and illustrative, the points that you've made, but there was just something about the story, and reading it a second time just before we came on air, I was looking at it and I think, oh, that's a good line, and that's a good line. But overall, I don't know. I would have. I suppose it would have been too easy for him to get back home to see the mess that had been made and thought, oh, look at what a fool I've been. Tidy up the mess. and turn his life around. You could still have his little dalliances with the women in the building, but it just seemed to be a bit disjointed, that ending where he wanted to strangle Elaine.
I thought that was perfect though, because at the end of the day, we can all see he brought this upon himself. We can all see how he put himself in this position, but he's still outwardly blaming women. The misogyny comes into play. He still thinks he has a right to kill her over this, and he wants to, right? Like he's still willing to look anywhere but himself, and he's still he's still gonna take it out. He's always taken out his frustrations. Like he was taking it out on his wife. He didn't even visit her the 2 years she was in the hospital. Like, right? He's a very cruel, unlikable man. And at the end, he doesn't change. He's still blaming women. He thinks he has a right to do whatever he wants to them. He wants to kill her.
I'm not sure that it sort of didn't come across to me that he was wanting to kill her because of what she'd done to him. It was like he didn't say anything about it, and it's all I wish Katrina was here so I could kill her too. But it seemed to me that was a little bit disjointed and a little bit separate from the situation he's in. I don't know. Maybe that's just me. I can see how it would be logical for him to act in that way, but I just thought the writer didn't sort of. It was almost like he was just acting irrationally, and he didn't kill her.
He just got out of jail. He saw his house in a mess. Could have just been. Would have been like a crime of, what do you call it? Not a crime of passion, but that's what it would be. Where you just get of rage.
Yeah, it's rage because he's blaming her, Katrina. That's why he wishes Katrina was there. Do you think if Darnell would have shown up, he would have had the same? I don't think he would have. I don't think he would have tried to choke or kill Darnell, right? It's specifically because they're women that I think he feels like he can do this.
Also, he probably wouldn't have been able to choke Darnell as a young guy. He'd have probably been stronger and able to resist. But yeah, it was like that whole way through for me. It was like for me, the author was nearly there with telling the story and nearly there with making the points, but not quite.
Yeah. For me, the points were made, and they were made because he didn't learn a lesson. I think that's the greater point to take away from this.
Yeah.
Right. Which is, we're publishing these two stories a week apart, but a little bit in the other story that we read for this week, 548 by John Cheever, which we're going to publish next week. That guy also doesn't learn his lesson. I guess we'll debate on that show, but he doesn't learn his lesson either. That's why I'm like, both of these have the same thing. Men who are entitled to women's bodies are sexually predatory. Women get their comeuppance. They don't learn a lesson. That's the story.
Yeah. Yeah.
In both cases. This one just has more like roller coaster to it, right? You have like the drug dealing and all the crazy stuff that happens, and he goes to jail.
Yeah, I guess because with this next week's story, I was right there with that one. It was something about the writing. I was straight there. I just loved that story, even though it was ostensibly very similar in the theme and the underlying story. But there's something about this one that it just didn't connect with me.
Did you understand that the couple was black?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Was it just from the way that they spoke, or
no? There was no. That was fine. Normally, sometimes dialect does sort of disconnect me, but this was fine. No, it was the, and I think I enjoyed the first half, 2/3 of the story, and I suppose, I don't know, maybe it's because I think that he's stupid because he wants younger women. He could, as he says in the story, he could have had his pick of of the women if that's what he wanted. And you know, there's that line in there that he says, as you know, God takes my wife and gives me another penis or something, which is sort of quite a funny line. And so I suppose it's frustration with the character for going after younger women and allowing them to sort of take over, them and their friends to take over his life and ruin his apartment and he'd sell his stuff and all that sort of thing. So I don't know. It's a funny story for me.
But that line, God takes my wife and gives me another penis, that line is again on point with the whole theme, right? Like his wife dies and the first thing he's thinking about is his dick.
Yes.
And how revitalized it is, and I can go and get anyone he wants.
Woohoo.
Not that her existence stopped him before.
No. And you know this whole sort of misogynistic lifestyle and the fact that he called her a whore because she had one affair while they were, you know, living together. It just, yeah, it is. I had no sympathy with him whatsoever. So yeah, maybe there were too many things. The author was throwing too many things in there that when the young people came and expanded, and you know, more and more young people stayed over and started ruining his life. I just I've really tried to work out how I felt about this, and I don't like the story, but I can't really put my finger on why.
Rami, has anything that we've said made you think differently about the story, changed your opinion in any way?
Oh, no, not really. But in what year do you think the story was set? Because there were a few years mentioned, but it wasn't clear how long after that were the present events taking place.
Let me see. I'm trying to see if I can find some better clues. I didn't actually think too much about that, but so we know 1977. Was that when he no, when did he retire?
That's when they decided to move into the place.
It's the 1980s when they are living together, because there's that line about the pumpkin pie. So Lanise stopped speaking to Horace for 9 months in 1984 and 1985 when she saw that her pumpkin pie was a bit smaller. So it's the early 80s.
Yeah, well, it's actually later than
Mid-80s.
that, because it says in 1987 Lanice's heart began the countdown to its last beat.
That's when she dies. Yeah.
That's when
So 87,
she died.
88.
She died 2 years later, so 89 was when she died. And all this stuff started.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's call it late 80s or the 90s. Yeah.
I think that reminded me, her not speaking to Horace for 9 months, forget being married. I don't know how you can speak to someone that you live with for 9 months. That's quite an impressive feat.
I mean, they do hate each other, and everybody else can see that.
Yeah.
And they're estranged from their son, increasingly estranged from the grandson too.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very bleak story. It's a very, yeah. I don't know. I should stop talking, because I start talking and thinking I don't know what I want to say. I don't want to say.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I liked it, but I guess I'm okay with its whole, this guy sucks, he will continue to suck forever. You know, that his last impulse is still to blame women. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess.
The only time he thinks positively of his wife is when he's in jail and a guy's picking his own boogers and he thinks about her handkerchiefs.
Yeah, I like when she was thinking about the guy in the Baptist church, and she wrote in her diary that he was not a big eater, and that down there his vitals were missing. I thought that was quite a funny line. So there's some quite clever and funny lines. and it's quite well written. It's quite
It is
and
well written. It's over 8,000 words, and it went fast for me. Maybe not for you guys, but for me, I just kept going.
yeah, it did for me. The second time through, I thought, oh, I've got to trudge this. But actually, it's the story has a good pace to it, and even though the sort of the mood of the piece rises and falls, it does have a good pace. Yeah, I think it's just it's this, he's a bad man. He does bad things, and he ends up a bad man, and you just think, I just wish there was something else, or maybe there was something lighter in the middle, or I don't know, something.
Do you think the fact that Katrina and Elaine were stealing from him made them also not likable enough for you to then latch onto them? Like, did you feel yourself rooting for them, or not really?
No, not really. No, because it initially it seemed strange to me that they, as 25-year-olds, would or it's Elaine and Jill or something, the first two.
Yeah, but Jill wasn't as interested. Jill just wanted alcohol, then left, right?
Yeah,
Elaine stayed.
Yeah, and you just think, why would they do that? Why would they? I mean, yes, Jill left, but Elaine stayed. And I suppose you could see what was in her mind, that she thought, yeah, I could, there's loads of food here. I've got, a comfortable apartment to stay in that would cost $25 anywhere else. So, a little bit of hug or whatever with this old guy, from a practicality point of view, you can see where she was coming from. But
I actually love that scene where she opens the fridge, she sees the food, and she goes, "Damn!" And she's like, and she starts thinking and calculating. I like that because without telling you anything about Elaine, it was a perfect show don't tell. The perfect show don't tell. You learn so much just from the way she's reacting to this. What was earlier described as a really small apartment, the government went cheap on it, it's a retirement community, it's all cramped and sucks. And for her, wow, he's a rich man. That's the other thing, such a rich man. He's not a rich man, right? He's a middle-class man who retired the way you're supposed to retire if you're middle class.
Yes, like retirement place, and
he's not a rich man.
Yeah, and the fact that he kept his records, and he kept his car, and paid for it to be kept in a garage, and so he controlled the whole marriage all the way through. It was all about him, and even though she still had a government job, and seemed to be a similar standing to him, it was always him who the author kept mentioning the photo of him with the defense secretary. It's like, this was a big thing, and he was only a sergeant in the army for 10 years, and then he was a clerk, administration person. So he was no great shakes in the workplace, but he thought that made him a much better person than Lenise.
Yeah. Worse, I'm trying to find that line where it's about how it was almost all his stuff when they moved in. Yeah. It was. Oh, I also like how they were at the beginning, as they're retiring. They talk about how they're going to try to actually live together as man and wife, devote themselves to each other, start again. Yeah. It takes 3 weeks in the retirement before he cheats on her. Yeah. My God. Yeah.
And there were so many really nice lines, like right at the start, it's over blackened catfish and a peach cobbler that they both agreed could have been better. I just thought that's a really nice line. It's sort of easy. It sort of introduced us to the people that basically they were fairly compatible. They had similar jobs. They seemed to be of similar stature, but he had, because he was the male, he had this sort of self-importance.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Also, Lenise, I wish I knew a little more about her. Like the way that she has all these euphemisms. Her euphemism for sex is he touched me. Right? Just he touched me today. That was her euphemism. Yeah. Trying to find, yeah. I think I agree with you that the first half, everything about their marriage was really, really good. And the way that it was written, I think that's why for me, it just flowed so quickly. And then once we got to the actual heavy plot of it, I was just like, what happens next? What happens next? What happens next?
Yeah.
Everyone moves in, starts selling drugs. He goes to jail, and it just moves very quickly at the end. So the beginning's slow, but it's so rich in its commentaries on marriage that it just kept me reading the next line.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think the first half was sort of fascinating, and he really drew the characters well. I thought they were great characters. Like you, I would have wished for a little bit more about the wife, but then that's the whole point, isn't it? It's all about him. It's always all about him.
Yeah. And there was one moment that I thought, when I read it like the second time through, I skimmed the second time through, I realized, the first time I didn't even realize this, but it was kind of odd how all of a sudden we go into this random cop's point of view as he's watching Elaine and Katrina escape. Like, because we stay very close to Horace for most of this. We veer away a little to Lanise, to her diary, to what's going on in her life, a little to Elaine when she's in the apartment, but it's like still like the main characters. All of a sudden it just goes through this, not even a minor character, the minorest of minor characters, but just in a random cop's head. He doesn't even have a name, and it's watching them escape out of nowhere. I don't know why I thought the way he was thinking about it was kind of funny, where he's like, oh, is that drugs? No, it's clothes. When they're like throwing the baby down and he like wants to see what they look like. The undertone is to see if they're hot. Like it's just a really random detour. But it added color to it.
Yeah, that's true. That was funny.
It was quite, a bit, probably a bit too random for me. It was, I would have, to me, it would have made more sense. But then, I'm not a big writer, but it made more sense to be sort of distant from the cop. But we were writing close with the cop and watching what was going on out of the window. So that was, it was quite sort of interesting.
Yeah. And more expert showing, not telling, is when Katrina and Elaine wake up and it's like, did you hear it? And they're so in tune to the walkie-talkies that they're hearing it through the door. Like, that's their lives. Is they're just like listening for that. They know to move, right?
Yeah.
Like a way that I don't think I'd even notice walkie-talkies, honestly. It would be part of the filter that your brain filters out, and they're alert for it at all times.
Yeah, and you would think that cops who are intending to do a sort of drugs bust, they would be quiet, and the walkie-talkies would be fairly quiet. But they're obviously, you say, it shows where they come from, their backgrounds, that they hear a bit of static or something, and they know what's going on, and that they're out of there straight away.
Yeah, and the whole time that Horace is with Katrina, a 28-year-old, he's still cheating on her. It's amazing. It's never enough. Even when this guy who's in his 60s lands a 28-year-old, he's cheating. Yeah. Made me think a little of Hugh Hefner.
Okay. And so many others too.
So many others. But I think in that one in particular, because it was like how he, whenever you'd watch like the Hugh Hefner thing, it's like everyone living there is living off his money, in this case a middle class man, but living off his money. There's like one or two women who sleep in the bed with him that are the girlfriends, but he still sleeps with whoever he wants and everyone knows. It was like that same like home dynamic, if you can even call it a home.
I wonder whether that's that's a parallel for this, whether that was maybe it was a parallel to the whole Playboy thing that he has, obviously not a rich mansion, but he has a comfortable place that people like to be around. And because he's compared to them, he's a rich man.
Right. It isn't even really a comfortable place by most people's standards. No. It's only a comfortable place if you're the kind of person who is impressed by a fridge full of food because your upbringing was so destitute and your family
Wow.
life was so bad, right?
Yeah.
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 Rami, anything else to add? Do you would like to say or ask?
No, it was okay.
All right. It sounds like we're about ready to rate then.
Yeah.
Yep.
Go on.
Okay, it's a 5.5 for me. I really liked it. I didn't
Wow.
struggle with it. I liked what he did with it. I thought it was good. I also had a little laugh at some of the like what we would consider black stereotypes, like it's a burgundy and gold Cadillac. Just little things like that I was just like, this is so middle class 80s, 90s, like of that period. Like not so much nowadays, but then I was like,
Okay.
he has all these little signifiers. I was reading one review by black culture writer who read this, and he was like, he immediately knew that that the couple was black because of the way that they spoke and other things like that. But that he also was a little amused by all these little like, it's like a little checklist.
Really?
Yeah.
Funny. For me, my rating's gone up and down. I think it's only a 3.5. I did quite like the writing. I liked some of the lines, but for some reason I couldn't connect to the story. It just didn't move me. So no, only 3.5, I'm afraid.
Mm. Rami?
I'll go with a 4.5. It kept me interested, but the ending was a little too abrupt for me, and I think, yeah, overall, story was okay.
Okay. All right. So there's no game because we already know what we're going to read for next week, which I already said we already read. But basically, Rami's been submitting this story for weeks now, so we're going to do it. It's The 548 by John Cheever. So go read that. But before you go, join our like-minded community at literaryroadhouse.com and leave your thoughts on the story. You won't be in violation of community rules if you also tweet at us on Twitter at @LitRoadhouse or chime in at our Facebook group for fans, the Literary Roadhouse Readers. For a long and wealthy life, we recommend you avoid philandering and instead take up reading. We can help you develop the habit. Join the Literary Roadhouse Book Club, where we discuss full fiction novels. You can see which books we're reading by visiting literaryroadhouse.com/books. Also, we don't have a rich perv to con out of his money. A shame, because Gerald was all for it, you can tell. Yes, we need to continue to produce this podcast honestly. Help keep us on the straight and narrow by showing your love for what we do. Contribute to our podcast expenses by making a donation on patreon.com/literary roadhouse. Every bit helps. And as always, share this podcast with the geriatric Don Juan in your retirement community. Until next time, read a good story.